Have you ever stopped to think about the immense, almost invisible power that the world's top predators hold? We're talking about the wolves, the sharks, the big cats. It turns out their very existence, or their absence, can literally change the shape of the world around us in ways you would never expect.
So let me just start with a question that sounds, well, impossible. How could a single animal, say a wolf, actually change the path of a river? I mean, it sounds like a riddle, right? But stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll not only know the answer, but you'll understand the incredible science behind it.
To solve that mystery, we first have to get a handle on the basic rules that run every ecosystem on Earth. You can think of it like learning the operating system for the natural world, the fundamental code that makes it all tick.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, something we all learned in school, the food chain. It's a simple idea, right? The sun's energy gets soaked up by a plant, a grasshopper eats that plant, a mouse eats the grasshopper, a snake gets the mouse, and a hawk snags the snake. It's just a straight line showing who eats who and where all that energy is going.
Now, each of these steps has a specific name. It's called a trophic level. So the plant, the producer, that's trophic level 1. The grasshopper is at level 2. And you just keep going all the way up to the top predator. It sounds a bit technical, but this idea of levels is absolutely crucial for understanding everything that's coming next.
But of course, nature is way messier than that. A hawk doesn't only eat snakes, and a mouse has to worry about more than just one predator. The reality looks a lot more like this tangled, complex food web, with all these different food chains crossing over and connecting in all sorts of ways.
And that is the key thing to remember. We need to stop thinking about a simple, neat line and start picturing this intricate, interconnected web, because it's within those connections that you find both the strength and the surprising vulnerability of an entire ecosystem.
So what gives this web its shape? Why are there always more plants than rabbits and more rabbits than foxes? The answer is one of the most basic, unchangeable laws of physics, and it's all about the flow of energy.
It all comes down to this one number, just 10%. This single little number is what dictates the entire structure of life on our planet. They call it the 10% rule. And what it means is that when an animal on one trophic level eats something from the level below it, it only gets to keep about 10% of that energy to build its own body. The other 90%, well, it's just lost. It gets used for running around, keeping warm, basically the cost of living. It's a cosmic tax on every meal.
And this energy pyramid shows you exactly why that matters. Look at the bottom. You start with a huge amount of energy from the sun. The plants capture a fraction of that. The herbivores get just 10% of that. And by the time you work your way up to the top predators, you're left with a tiny, tiny sliver of the original energy. This is it. This is why the world can support massive forests, but only a handful of tigers. There just isn't enough energy to go around.
Let's make this really personal. Check this out. On the left, you see the amount of corn it would take to feed humanity if we all just ate the corn directly. On the right, that's the amount of corn you'd need if you fed it to cattle first and then we ate the cattle. Because you lose 90% of the energy in that cow-shaped middle step, you need a phenomenally larger base of crops to support a meat-eating population.
So, just a quick thought experiment for you. Knowing that 10% rule, which diet do you think can feed more people using the exact same amount of land? The answer has massive implications for our whole planet, and it really just comes down to basic physics.
Okay, so we've got the rules of the food web, we understand how energy flows. Now we can finally get back to our mystery. What happens when you pull one single, crucial piece from the very top of that web?
This, my friends, is a trophic cascade. It's a chain reaction. It's what happens when you make one change at the top and the effects cascade, like dominoes, all the way down to the very bottom, changing everything, even the landscape itself.
The classic example is the sea otter. It's perfect. When sea otters are around, they love to eat sea urchins. That keeps the urchin numbers down, which allows these incredible underwater kelp forests to flourish. But what happens if you take the otters away? The sea urchin population just explodes. They eat everything, and that vibrant forest collapses into a barren wasteland. One animal disappears, and the entire world changes. Now, this pyramid structure has a dark side. The very same process that makes energy so scarce at the top can also concentrate some really nasty stuff.
It's a process called biomagnification. You see, when certain toxins, like pesticides or industrial chemicals, get into an ecosystem, they don't break down. They get stored in fat. And as one animal eats another, those stored toxins get passed up the food chain. But unlike energy, they don't disappear. They build up.
They magnify.
Take a look at this real-world example from the Great Lakes. We're going to track a toxic chemical called PCB as it moves up the food web, and you're about to see just how extreme this concentration can get.
Okay, so at the very bottom, in the phytoplankton, the concentration is minuscule, just 0.025 parts per million.
You'd barely even know it's there. But then it gets eaten, and that animal gets eaten, and by the time we get to a predator like the lake trout, look at that number. It has jumped to 4.83 parts per million. That's almost 200 times more concentrated.
And then, at the very top of this food chain, the herring gull that eats those fish. The concentration of PCBs in its eggs is a mind-blowing 124 parts per million. We went from 0.025 all the way to 124. That's a magnification of nearly 5,000 times. It shows you exactly why apex predators are so incredibly vulnerable to pollution. The very food web that sustains them can also poison them.
So, let's bring this all home. Whether it's changing the shape of a river or acting like a sponge for toxins, it's clear that the animals at the top of the food web have an impact that is just wildly out of proportion to how many of them there are. And the scary part is, that critical influence is disappearing. As this research points out, these predator populations are plummeting all over the world. And as we now know, the result isn't just fewer predators, it's a colossal imbalance in the very fabric of their ecosystems.
Which finally brings us back to our river. When wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park, it set off a trophic cascade. They kept the elk population in check, which meant that trees along the rivers could finally grow back. Those trees stabilized the riverbanks, which literally narrowed the rivers and changed their course. They changed the geography. So I'll leave you with this. We, humans, have become the planet's ultimate apex predator, and we've removed the others from almost everywhere. So, knowing everything you know now about trophic cascades, what do you think happens next?